Hey everyone, and welcome to the show. You know, when you think about it, um, can you imagine like facing death, not just for yourself, but like for your comrades,
Right.
to break through an enemy line or just secure like a vital objective when everything's on the line
Yeah, especially,
in a war like World War One?
yeah, in the final embers of a war, as horrific as that.
Exactly. That's the kind of courage we're going to explore today
Right.
as we do this deep dive into, the stories behind the Victoria Cross,
Absolutely.
focusing specifically on, some of these incredible individuals
Right.
who earned this award during the final months of World War One on the Western Front.
Yeah, and the thing is, for you, what's so fascinating about this book is that it's not, this sweeping narrative of battles won and lost.
Right.
It's really like a series of intense close-ups on these moments of incredible bravery.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And we're going to be looking at military history and biography here,
Oh.
examining the deeds of men from various ranks, various regiments who earned the highest military honor in places like Picardy and Valenciennes in France during October and November 1918,
Right, right.
leading up to those crucial preparatory operations for the Battle of the Sambre.
What really struck me about this book, and I think you'll appreciate this too, is, the sheer variety of circumstances under which these acts of valor occurred.
Right.
It wasn't just one type of heroism. It was like this multitude of different types of bravery.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
and reflecting, I guess, the diverse challenges of late war fighting.
Right.
I also really valued, I don't know if you've ever felt this way about certain history books, but the glimpses into their personal lives, like their families, their pre-war connections,
Yeah. That.
really brought these guys to life for me.
Absolutely. It humanizes it so much more.
Yeah, and it really underscores, even in those final weeks of the war, how intense the combat still was.
Right.
Staggeringly high.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so I don't know, from your perspective, what did you find particularly interesting about it?
I think it's fascinating for you to consider is that, this collection, it provides a really valuable overview of these stories.
Right.
But because of that, sometimes the descriptions of the actual events themselves, the actions are quite brief.
Yeah.
And it almost leaves you wanting more.
Yeah, you want that tactical detail.
Yeah, you want more of a detailed understanding of the tactical situations surrounding each of these acts of bravery.
Yeah.
The other thing is the sheer volume of information. It can occasionally lead to a presentation that feels a bit like a list,
Right.
which makes it sometimes a bit harder to absorb, the significance of each individual story.
Yeah, you get the overall picture,
Right.
but you want to go deeper.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
the book doesn't quite always let you do that.
So overall, for me, I'd give it like a 3.5 out of 5 stars.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, that's fair.
it's a solid collection,
Yeah.
but yeah, it could go a little bit deeper in some places.
Absolutely, but I think it's a great starting point.
Yeah.
For anyone who's interested in this subject.
So let's, kind of unpack some of these remarkable stories
Yeah.
and the context in which they unfolded.
Yeah, let's dive in.
So we can start by looking at, I guess, chronologically, right?
Or chronologically, yeah.
The 23rd and 24th of October, 1918, near Oldfield in France.
Okay.
And here we're introduced to Lieutenant Frederick Hedges of the Bedfordshire Regiment, attached to the 6th Northamptonshire Regiment.
Right.
And it's interesting because the excerpt doesn't really provide a lot of specifics about, what he did to actually earn the Victoria Cross.
Yeah, it's a bit of a starting point for us, really, isn't it?
Right.
It's almost like an introduction
Yeah.
to this whole world.
Moving forward on the 24th of October, 1918, in Bausis, France.
Okay.
That's where we have Lieutenant William Bissett of the 16th Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders
Right.
distinguish himself. And what I thought was really interesting was that before the war, he was involved with the territorial force.
Yeah. That's...
And he was even part of the town band and church choir in Crieff.
For you, that just speaks volumes about, the kind of guy he was.
Right,
This sense of civic duty
Yeah.
that extends beyond just his immediate community into military preparedness.
Yeah.
And the territorial force, for those who don't know, was essentially a reserve army.
Right.
It was citizen soldiers.
Citizen soldiers. Yeah.
So it's really interesting, and we see his progression through the ranks as well.
Yeah.
He mobilizes with the 16th Battalion in August 1914.
Okay.
He serves in France from May 1915. He's promoted to sergeant and then battalion bombing sergeant by May 1916.
Wow.
So you see this gradual rise.
Yeah,
It suggests, he's gaining experience, he's gaining leadership capabilities leading up to this specific act of bravery
right.
that earns him the VC.
Yeah, it's that kind of building up to this moment.
Exactly.
And then our sources take us to the 25th of October, 1918, east of Maing in France.
Okay.
But interestingly, the excerpts we have don't actually mention a Victoria Cross recipient for that date and location.
Right. So we kind of skip over that.
So we skip over that and we go to the Battle of Valenciennes, which takes place on the 1st of November, 1918.
Okay. Big battle.
Yeah, and this is where Sergeant Hugh Cairns of the 46th Battalion, South Saskatchewan Canadian Expeditionary Force, performs these incredible actions that lead to him posthumously being awarded the Victoria Cross.
Right.
And it's fascinating to learn that his family was actually from Ashington, Northumberland in England,
Right.
but his brother Henry, or Harry as he was known, emigrated to Canada with his family in 1911.
So what does that connection to his family, both in England and Canada,
Right.
tell you about the context of this,
It's like this international
Yeah, exactly.
story. Yeah.
For you, it highlights the fact that these weren't individuals operating in a vacuum.
Right.
These guys had deep personal ties,
Yeah.
family histories that extended across continents sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
And, his brother Harry's own service with the 8th Canadian Stationary Hospital
Right.
and his various postings throughout the war, even while dealing with his own health challenges.
Yeah.
It reminds us that, these acts of bravery were often performed by very ordinary people who
Yeah.
had their own struggles, their own connections.
Right.
And it really adds this element of humanity onto what can sometimes feel like a very purely military account.
Right, right. It's not just names and dates, it's actual people.
Absolutely.
And then we move on to the 2nd of November, 1918, at Hapagarbes in France, during the preparatory operations for the Battle of the Sambre.
Okay.
And we meet Sergeant James Clark of the 15th Lancashire Fusiliers.
All right.
And his story is interesting because it extends beyond the immediate circumstances of his bravery.
In what way?
Well, we learn that he died in Rochdale later on,
Okay.
and he was initially buried in an unmarked grave, even though he had full military honors at his funeral.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's this kind of sobering reminder
Right.
that sometimes even these most remarkable acts of courage can fade from memory.
Absolutely.
But thankfully, the Lancashire Fusiliers Regimental Association erected a headstone for him in 1993.
That's good to hear. Yeah.
And it was dedicated in 1994 with his daughter present.
Oh, wow.
And he even attended 3 VC reunions,
That's amazing.
which I think underscores that these awards weren't just for a single event.
Right.
It created this lasting bond between these recipients.
For you, it speaks to the enduring respect and significance attached to the Victoria Cross.
Yeah.
And the men who earned it, within their regimental families and local communities
Yeah.
long after the war was over.
Yeah, it's this real sense of belonging and camaraderie.
Absolutely.
So now we get to the 4th of November, 1918, the Battle of the Sambre.
Okay, another big one.
Yeah. And subsequent operations in our sources, detail several acts of bravery on this day alone.
Right.
Let's start by looking at the Sambre Canal south of Quétillon in France.
Okay.
And here we have Major George Finley of the 409th Field Company, Royal Engineers.
Right.
And what's interesting about him is that his family was connected to a Glasgow firm involved in the East India trade.
Okay, so quite a prestigious background.
Yeah, and he had pre-war military service in the Queen's Own Royal Glasgow Yeomanry.
Interesting.
And he didn't just serve on the front lines.
Right.
He was a staff officer to the Chief Royal Engineer of V Corps earlier in the war.
Okay.
So he had a good understanding of these military operations.
Yeah, broader understanding.
And we even get a glimpse into his post-war life and family, which really humanizes him.
Right.
Makes him more than just a soldier.
Exactly, yeah.
Also on that same canal, the Sambre Canal, south of Quétillon, we have Lieutenant Colonel Dudley Johnson of the South Wales Borderers attached to the 2nd Royal Sussex.
Okay.
And his military career extended well beyond World War I.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was involved in the Dunkirk evacuation
Wow.
during World War II.
Okay.
And he later held roles in the Home Guard and as Inspector of Infantry.
For you, that continued dedication to military service really stands out.
Yeah, it's like this lifelong
Right.
commitment.
And it culminated in his honorary colonelcy of the 4th Battalion Monmouthshire Regiment.
So it's like he never really left
No, exactly.
the Army.
Right.
Now we move a little bit north on the Sambre Canal north of Ours.
Okay.
And we have 2nd Lieutenant James Kirk of the 10th Battalion attached to the 2nd Manchester Regiment.
Okay.
And we know that he was educated in Birmingham.
Right.
And there's a commemorative paving stone at Cheadleholm War Memorial dedicated to him.
Oh, wow.
And his name is also on the Ring of Remembrance in France.
Right.
And he's buried in Orr's Communal Cemetery alongside other notable figures of the war.
Okay.
Which is, yeah, it adds another layer of historical weight to his story.
It really does.
Also at the Sombroise Canal north of Wars was Major Arnold Waters of the 218th Field Company Royal Engineers.
Okay.
And he had a background in engineering before the war.
Right.
And what's really amazing is that he had already been awarded the Military Cross for actions at Newport.
Wow. So he already had a track record.
Yeah, he was already a very brave and competent soldier.
Oh.
And after the war, he continued serving in a way by working as a consulting civil engineer, and he was involved with war pensions.
Okay.
So he stayed connected to the military community.
Yeah, really dedicated his life to it in a way.
And serving in the same unit, the 218th Field Company Royal Engineers, was Sapper Adam Archibald.
Okay.
And he served alongside Major Waters, so they probably experienced the same action together.
Yeah, they must have been through together.
And there's even a painting of their VC action at the Royal Engineers Museum.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So you can actually see it depicted
Yeah.
visually.
So we have all these stories of individual courage,
Right.
but it's also important to understand, I think, the broader context in which they occurred.
Absolutely.
You know, October and November 1918.
Yeah.
From a strategic perspective, this period was all about offensive operations by the BEF.
Right. The British Expeditionary Force.
After years of basically being stuck in trenches,
Yeah. Static trench warfare.
they were now pushing forward.
Exactly. They're on the move.
And the BEF had gotten a lot better at fighting by this point,
Right.
hadn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. For you, it's important to recognize how much the BEF's firepower had improved in their tactical approaches.
Yeah.
You know, they learned a lot from those early years of the war.
Right.
And they were now employing much more sophisticated combined arms tactics.
Right.
However,
Yeah.
our sources also highlight that there were still challenges.
Yeah.
You know, particularly for the Third Army in the opposed river crossing of the Selle.
Right.
This was a high-stakes operation
Yeah.
against a determined enemy.
Right.
And their strength closely matched that of the attacking forces.
So you mentioned these improvements in tactics. Can you give us an example of what that actually looked like for the soldiers?
Absolutely. So let's look at the 32nd Division during one of these canal crossings.
Okay.
They used smoke screens,
Right.
which were generated by mortars
Right.
from the No. 1 Special Company RE to provide cover for the assault troops as they advanced.
Right.
And the artillery barrage was meticulously coordinated
Yeah.
to lift from the eastern canal bank at this precise moment,
Okay.
allowing just enough time for bridge construction to begin
Right.
and for that first wave of troops to cross
Wow.
before the barrage moved further inland.
That's incredible.
It's incredible.
That level of coordination.
Right.
Yeah.
It demonstrates how effective they had become.
But it wasn't just these big offensives, was it?
No, not at all.
There was still a lot of intense local fighting happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a great example of that for you is the advance of the 18th Royal Warwickshire Regiment at Landrecies. And this really illustrates the kind of resistance they were facing.
Okay.
Even with tanks, even with Lewis guns, they were coming under heavy fire from machine guns and Minenwerfers, which
Yes.
were these German mortars.
Right.
And some enemy positions, they were even overlooked initially because of the morning mist.
Yeah.
So follow-up companies had to go in and clear them.
Right.
And they even deliberately destroyed the road bridge at Landrecies.
Wow.
So the Germans were putting up a real fight.
Even in those last
Yeah, even those final months.
months,
Yeah.
it was not an easy advance.
No, not at all.
It's amazing to think about these individual stories
Right?
and, you know, the larger offensive that's happening at the same time.
Right.
It really shows the sacrifices made
It does, yeah.
during those final pushes of World War I.
And it's also important to remember for you
Yes.
just how much the British Army had adapted by this point.
Okay.
Their structure, their firepower.
Right.
So, for example, infantry divisions had fewer battalions than earlier in the war,
Okay.
but they gained pioneer battalions dedicated to logistics.
Right.
And despite having fewer artillery pieces embedded within the division itself,
Okay.
the overall firepower available to a division actually increased
Oh, wow.
because they were getting reinforcements from Army-level artillery assets.
Wow.
And the massive increase in organic firepower at the infantry level.
Yeah.
Things like hundreds of Lewis guns per division compared to none at the start of the war.
Yeah.
That speaks volumes about the evolution of their combat effectiveness.
It's remarkable how much they transformed in such a short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, for you, these stories, they offer a really powerful insight
I do. Yeah.
into the human experience of war.
Absolutely. They remind us of the exceptional circumstances
Right.
and the remarkable bravery displayed by these individuals
Right.
during this incredibly intense chapter of a devastating conflict.
Exactly. So if you're interested in learning more about these stories of courage and sacrifice,
Right.
please like and subscribe for more deep dives into history.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back.
And you can find a link to the book we talked about today down in the description below on Amazon.
Right.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's really humbling to learn about these extraordinary people.
It is.
And I'd love to hear from you what moment from these accounts stood out to you the most.
Yeah, leave a comment below.
Leave a comment below and share this with anyone who might find it interesting.
Yeah, spread the word.
Okay, great talking to you.
Yeah, great to be here.
See you next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Yeah.